Welcome to Surviving the Dream with your hosts, Casey Arnold
and David Conley.
We're here to talk to people who seem to have their dream job and find out, what did it take? Is it what they imagined? Is it worth it? How do they do it?
Join us as we uncover the secrets of surviving the dream.
Hi, Dave.
Hello, Casey. Life is so different, isn't it, now in 2025?
Yeah, we made it through our long holiday time. We're back to whatever reality may or may not be.
I think it's best to be an alternative reality in 2025. I've decided already. Yeah, it's just, it is what it is. I
survived. Even get away to double digits to just day 3.
Yeah, just survive till 25. I've done that. Tick. Yeah.
I'm going to thrive in 25. That's what I'm aiming for.
Oh, someone was at the Television Academy when they gave that speech.
Was it? I was not. But I was
that was a speech
with other writer friends about like how depressed are we like from what get-go, and I decided nope, I'm gonna still be optimistic until it's beaten out of me the way life intended.
Yeah, that was the message from the TV Academy last year. Don't just survive, thrive in 25.
All right. Let's thrive. Let's get this podcast started.
All right. Who have we got today then?
So today I'm going to read his job because it's not a job title that rolls off my tongue easily. He's a senior creative in advertising brand design, which I personally don't fully understand, but it sounds super cool. And it sounds like he's a creative person who's figured out how to earn a living and maybe manipulate us into buying stuff, which is also fascinating. So, hi, Michael Murphy.
Michael Murphy.
This is fun.
I know all about advertising. I tell you because I watched Mad Men, so I know everything there is to know.
There you go.
TV tells all truths, right?
Yeah. So,
is your job anything like Don Draper in Mad Men?
I don't have to wear the suits. I don't have to put the gel in the hair. But I do think that we are thinking about brand conversations, brand narrative. I think he lived it, understood it, and kind of in that show almost looked at brands like people and treated them like people, and almost like lovers. What do they need? What do they want? And how can they be shared with the rest of the people? And I think that's the same thing, right? Is keeping that brand narrative alive with consumers.
I like framing it like that. So do you feel like you're in a relationship with certain brands and like some you want to be with forever and some you wish you could just break up with?
I think that is absolutely the truth. I think, and it's in advertising, it's our game to stay at least stay a fling. It doesn't have to be the first wife, but at least maybe a distant concubine.
And so that I know that what you do, you're Don Draper, not Pete Campbell, right? Is that?
I don't project any of those on myself, and I probably don't deserve any of those iconic tropes, but so
that we understand, you're more of a Don Draper, right? You're the creative.
I'm the creative part, keeping keeping the brand alive, figuring out what needs to be said and heard to consumers that may have already have an established relationship with a brand or that are brand new to seeing a product.
So what does that look like? Like, let's say we're like, hi, we're launching a new telephone brand, and we know like people already have their loyalty to a phone. How do you get them to divorce? I'm going to stick with the relationship thing. How do you get them to divorce their current phone and have an affair with a new one?
Oh, I think that there's a few different things. Obviously, there's always money, right? If you're whatever angle you have, if you're cheaper, then you're going to say you're cheaper. If you're more reliable, you're going to say you're more reliable. All those things you hear, on TV, cheaper or more reliable, seldom both. But you find where you are on the market and what your advantage is, and sometimes there aren't any. Right. So sometimes you just have to be more fun.
That's how I advertise myself. I know what I've got and what I don't have. Dave's more fun. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Less reliable, still more expensive, but but I still love you.
But still kind of fun. Look at.
Yeah. Kind of fun.
Yeah, so you have to identify what that is, what your market advantage is, and really try to turn that in. It's like, like if you're dressing up for a night out, what assets do you have that you could possibly, show off? It's no different. It's packaging in every way.
Can I just say, coming from a European angle, because that's where I was brought up, obviously, is what shocked me when I came to America, excuse me, is that you are allowed to negative advertise. You
mean like shame other products to heighten yours?
There's no way you could do that in Europe. Excuse me. You can't negatively say that we're better than that one and name them for sure.
And not in the first read, not in the second read do we do that. But I would say if someone's diving deeper into a brand, you'll see a lot of brand comparisons. If you're sticking with the mobile, for example, you'll dive in, you'll see, hey, here are the other maps of coverage, or here are the other price points of other products. You'll definitely do that, but I don't think people are wanting to do that right with a brand comparison right away. But yeah, I always try to stay positive in advertising, and usually second, third read, people that are doing that on their own. So on the websites, you'll go there, or on social media, you'll go there and see those brand comparisons.
Dave, are you going to make it through this podcast? Are you going to survive?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to survive.
I thought you were having like a flashback from your youth.
Well, the other thing we can't do in Europe, and that's is that we can't advertise anything to do with pharmaceuticals, cigarettes certainly is a big no-no, and alcohol. But you can do that in America, right?
Yeah, I mean, it shifts all the time, but I mean, for a long time, you couldn't advertise hard liquor on TV, and now we can. So things change all the time, and that's I don't what you can advertise changes, but how people are selling products, it doesn't change too much.
Do you have any advice for people trying to brand and sell themselves on a dating app?
I've been married for too long to understand the swipe right culture, unfortunately.
You're missing nothing.
I just had a friend that tries to kill them with humor. Like, it's just such a preposterous, humorous thing to package yourself for love or sex, that he just literally acknowledges the humor in that and just kind of keeps going with the humor with that platform.
Yeah, you have to. I just wonder, if that's your lens on how you see things. It's here, I won't go off on this tangent too much. You guys are both married. It's just hilarious to me of people will post a picture of them from 5 years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, and one today, as if you can go back in some time machine and pick what phase of their life you want to date them. What is that?
I've just updated my passport photo. It's a big shock when you go, hold on, can I use the previous one?
Maybe in another 10 years we can.
Right?
Yeah. It's hey, babe, let's put on these goggles and go out as 22-year-olds.
Right. I'm not super feeling you right now, but 28-year-old you really appeals to me. Let's explore that option.
Yeah, maybe if I proposed that to my wife, I wonder how long I'd last. It's 2010 was amazing. Let's go back and just stay there.
So, Michael, how do you get into something like advertising? Was this a dream job for you?
I majored in fine arts and came out of USC with a great experience level in fine arts. I taught under some of kind of the cool kids of LA, and really trained in a conceptual background, and went into my first job was doing sculptures for movies, theme parks, and Vegas hotels.
Wow!
And I quickly realized that I'd probably lose a finger sooner or later, and so I jumped into the very beginnings of digital advertising. I was really lucky. This was the late 90s. I joined a marketing, design, and advertising firm that still had drafting tables, and I was really trained. Luckily, I was trained in school for those tools. Back in those days, it was Photoshop, Illustrator, and Quark Express. They were the major players, and I really jumped in and mastered those tools and software, and I was able to be the young guy that translated the drafting table advertising comps into digital comps and into final products that went out into print. But at that time, the internet was emerging, so I was also lucky enough to be there to do the becomings of digital advertising, from early animated GIFs to page takeovers and things like that. I was just lucky enough to be there, and I think that I had enough rich experience through art history, through just consuming buckets and buckets of magazines my entire life, that when I was able to get into the job, that I spoke the language. And I was just really lucky that I think from an early age I spoke a visual language, and I understood that. And I understood the languages of the clients that we had at the time right away, and I was able to translate their needs into pictures.
And did you see yourself going into this world, or was this something that happened?
I always dreamed of kind of being that artist with the big loft, making big paintings and big sculptures. But, life just got perpetually more and more expensive here in LA, I think.
It does, doesn't it?
Living's gone up maybe literally like 500% or something like that since I graduated college. So it just didn't make sense. The cool kids of LA, Ed Ruscha and those guys, they paid rent. Their rent was like $45 a month. They would do like one job. And Ed Ruscha was a sign painter. He was essentially doing what I did. He drew, he drew large billboards and things like that, and he wouldn't have to do very many of them per month to spend the rest of his month painting. And that variable just doesn't exist anymore, at least here in Southern California.
So did you know, it sounds like you hit upon like the right thing for your skill set and stability. Like, were you aware of brand advertising as like a job that you sought after, or did you fall into it?
The software is really where I fell into. It was like all of a sudden, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and even in some ways, this is like when music was coming along and music, all Napster and all these downloading softwares. All of a sudden, everything became accessible and manipulable. And it was just so much fun making remix songs to making huge photo montages of art, and then taking pictures of my sculptures or paintings and literally putting them next to the classics of art. It was just I was just obsessed with the narrative that was this accessible digital narrative that was with us. And I saw advertising a way of staying like adjacent to that communication style, right? Like staying on the edge. I wasn't necessarily making art all day. I was making advertising, but I was still very keen to the tools.
Do you remember the first product or campaign that you're like, wait, this visual and this narrative and this cool thing, and like you got to apply it and it worked, like when it clicked?
Yeah, it was actually pretty classic. I think it was old GPS, handheld GPS units, but this is before phones. So this would be for people going on huge fishing expeditions, or huge out in the Pacific, or out in the mountains, or hiking, and or even if people didn't want to get lost on road trips and they just wanted to know their GPS coordinates. And I remember their icon was like this kind of half circle, and I came up with this ad campaign where the half circles were around everywhere they looked, in the landscapes. I even did one that was like a vintage one where it was like, getting lost is a thing of the past. It was like, a 50s couple that were like swimming in a 8-foot map, and not looking too happy with each other. And then it was just like, or you can just have this GPS unit. So I even used art history in my early advertising. That's really a lot of fun.
The last time I remember using one of those when I was on tour, one of those GPS things where you could get the coordinates. And I remember ringing up my wife because I was in the middle of a snowstorm driving between Washington State and Idaho. And I remember ringing her up and saying, hey, I've got the coordinates. Can you see where this storm is? And she says, you're not even in it yet. And I had to stop the car and throw up because I thought I was dead. So I don't know if that advertises that product, but it told me that I was near death.
I'm pretty sure you want to stay away from throwing up in a campaign, but I'm no expert.
It it was a great lesson. He was like, on a conceptual level, the idea only took me, took us a day to think of the idea, but selling it was a big thing for me. But then I realized that if I also did the production, if I was able to deliver the files to the trade magazines, to deliver the files to whatever trade shows there might have been, or even do the final digital files for whatever digital ad banner campaign there were, then I was really in control of all of it. I didn't have to worry as much as being like I was part of the entire conversation, from speaking to the client to delivering it on the production end. And I realized at an early age that if I stayed sharp on both ends, that I would stay viable.
So, Michael, it sounds to me that you don't actually live like Don Draper. You don't actually have the client and then like have a little nice brown drink and then come up with an idea. Because that's what he seems to do. He seems to get drunk, lie down, and then come up with an idea. How does it work for you?
Really, I mean, the idea part is a lot of fun, but that's really only like 5%, I think, of the advertising. There's so many different variables of execution, and there's a lot of variables of working in teams. Like how do we work with the other client's marketing department? How do you work with, in our case, it was overly zealous, controlling account manager that didn't really was essentially in the way. But
that's Pete Campbell, right? Is that Pete Campbell?
Yeah. I mean, it's a dance of people as much as it's a dance of advertising, and so you just have to really take your ego out of it. In the end, I always say no one remembers what you did a month or two ago, so it just doesn't matter to like really put your flag down and fight for something. It's in the end, it's a team game, and you win or lose as a team. But what I realized to keep my value was basically to keep my production skills up as well as my creative skills. I always knew that I could have great ideas, and to be honest, a lot of people can have great ideas. But the value was the other 95%, right? Communicating with people, understanding how to do the production and on the art side really kept me valuable. And still to this day, I'm still that person who could do the animations in After Effects as well as come up with the concepts in the front end. And I think that as long as I can do that, and things are always changing, it's a perpetual learning curve. Now, of course, with AI tools and everyone wanting to participate in this AI conversation, that's the newest thing, but just to stay in front of it. I don't really consider AI like to be a massive tool for us in advertising. I think in every couple of years, there's new massive tools to stay in front of, and no different than it was 10 years ago designing for phones. No different than it was 20 years ago designing for the internet.
How do you stay current? Are there like classes you have to take regularly? Do you need to get like recertified or anything like that? Or is this your own personal, how relevant do you want to be?
I think a lot of times it's not just the stuff I'm doing in the agency life, right? It's stuff I'm doing on my own that kind of keeps my edge sharp. Whether it be doing art, animated art projects that are like projections on walls that are essentially parallel teaching me animation skills, or using new tools to print a 200 page book, and how to use style sheets to save time and things like that. As long as I'm pushing myself, I'm in the production world, I'm always certain that I can bring good ideas. But that two-headed monster is how I've stayed alive and kind of how I've survived.
What I found refreshing about you, Michael, is that, I've spoken to other people in advertising who think that it's the be-all and end-all. But what you're saying, if I'm hearing this right, you're saying it's disposable.
In my opinion, advertising is disposable because people don't look back, right? It's not like, the only people that have advertising campaign posters in their house are the ones that did them. Right? It's not like, I grew up with like Bo Jackson, ad campaign when I was a kid and things like that, and Bo Knows, or, all these kind of sport trope campaigns that were ads, but they were essentially glorious advertisements around an athlete, kind of. And I guess in some ways you could say that those ads were so good that they lived on my wall. You could also say that Bo was so good that he lived on my wall. So it's hard to know.
Do you have a favorite campaign, be it yours or somebody else's, that you go, oh, that is the one that I wish I'd done, or I loved, or I admire?
I don't really think in those frames. To be honest, I maybe am a product of my own ideology, but I don't kind of remember.
Really? There isn't even one that like sticks with you that's just kind of like made it into your lexicon?
I because I'm an art history like sucker, and I love products that tie into the larger history of humanity, and like tie us into the Olympics. Did this glorious campaign where they would do like someone hurdling over a hurdle, and it would be this beautiful athlete, and they would do left side the real photograph of the athlete, and the right side it would be like the Greek pottery drawing right on the right side. Uh-huh. But what that did was all of a sudden say, hey, participate in this giant dance of humanity. It puts things happening today in accordance with things that happened 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago, in Greece. And those type of things I like because it makes us feel like a part of something bigger. And I think whenever a product makes you feel part of something bigger, that's good. Like a camping product, maybe it's just like those long matches, for example, those long firewood matches. Something happened where I was at a New Year's party and someone brought one out, and they were like, oh yeah, my dad used to use those matches, and someone else's dad used those long matches. And I was like, that would be exactly where I would take those things, is like, be like your grandfather, remember how, and tell and use that match as a narrative of how you're communicating with your son or daughter about a beautiful experience you had with your grandparents, So I always think of like if a product can tie itself into a larger dance of humanity, it's a beautiful thing, and I always look for that opportunity.
I love that. And now I fully understand what you do. And I can see how you are like more visual and you relate it to like story and feeling. Whereas I think maybe Dave and I are like, but the words, the tagline, or I won't speak for you, Dave, but I have a friend that I literally trade fun taglines with back and forth in like admiration of like, how can you tell that story and connect people and whatever in like 6 words? I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
That's really important. I think that's really important. But I think the feeling has got to be the first thing. And then the lines and the visuals work around the feelings, So again, it's really the 12-inch matchstick, or if it's the Olympics advertising campaigns, it's like, where's the feeling? What's the most important feeling we can evoke that's going to really bring people back to the product?
Yeah, it's fun. There's a similar thing I learned like when starting to do stand-up, that it was sharing versus selling. And it feels like you're sharing like a piece of humanity of like, well, if you've never tried this long matchstick, or if you have all these memories, like you can relive all that again, versus like, just buy this shit. It's cheap and it's available. And who knows, like you're coming from a more connected place.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think in especially with products that are essentially offer. So maybe, how do I say this? If there's 1,000 products on the market that are all doing essentially the same thing, then feelings is what makes the difference.
Yeah.
In today's world, we all could just jump on Amazon and find the cheaper version of whatever's out there.
And is there an ethical issue with advertising? How do you, there is, but how do you contend with that? When someone comes to you with a product and you're going, oh, do I really want to push this?
Well, I think I deal with that every day. And to be honest, I have not figured that out, right? It's not like we need a lot of this stuff. To be honest,
I think I'm glad that let's put that in the soundbite. It's not that we need this stuff.
I mean, in some cases that's the truth, but that's the world I've chosen to be in. I mean, in other cases, yeah, do we need tires? Do we need cars? Do we need sweatshirts? And do we even need a match? Yes, we need all those things. So the question then just becomes like, and am I buying those things? Have I figured out a world where I'm not driving cars and using tires and not, yeah. So, hey, I've bought in. So it's like, who am I to take a moral stance of something that I'm participating in, in the consumption rates of.
Yeah. And so how do you find the balance? I know you said that doing the artistic stuff on the side is part of what feeds you to be able to do the advertising. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the books, exhibitions, and paintings I do are, I think, a really healthy way of showing other people that in advertising that I'm not all about one thing. And I think that brings a broader perspective. I think it helps people like me more and understand that I'm just not living to be in advertising, that advertising becomes a vehicle for me to do books and exhibitions. And I think in many cases, everyone else in advertising has the same thing. Or on the other side, on the client side, everyone else is working to enable something else in their life. And so when I'm able to show a broader version of me, I'm more relatable, I'm more likable. And sometimes we all just don't want to talk about what we're selling, right? And it's a nice way to kind of broaden the conversation.
Tell us about these books. What are these books that you're talking about, Michael, that you're saying?
I've been lucky enough to do some books. I started off doing then and now books. I grew up in an old house in Santa Monica that was owned by an old mayor, and I found some hidden closets when I was a kid. And one of those closets had a 1902 book of 110 photographs of old Santa Monica.
Wow.
And I held on to that book until my mid-30s and realized and the old addresses in the book had a different numeric address system. So I was looking at these 110 buildings not knowing exactly where they were. And finally, I just decided to do a then and now book.
And did you find the buildings?
Yeah, I found all 110 locations. There's these amazing Sanborn maps that were published pre-war. They're insurance maps, fire insurance maps that every major city had, that you can go back into history and see these footprints of these buildings with different the old numeric address system. Right. So what happened was I turned that into a book and exhibition, and what happened then was all these other collectors of old photography called me up and asked, how did I do it?
Very cool. What's the name of the book so people can check it out?
It's called Santa Monica, A Look Back to 1902 from Today. And then I did another book about the Santa Monica Pier in 1917. And then I did a small postcard book that sells in all the LA tourist, city of LA tourist stores, called A Look Back to 1930s Los Angeles, where I took 1930s postcards with my partner Jens Lucking and reshot 30 1930s postcard locations, and did this kind of photo montage of all those. And then the last one I just did was a book, a monograph about Googie Modern, architecture of the mid-century. It's mid-century commercial architecture. And it's a monograph of R. Davis Newlove, the guys that did Norms, the guys that did Denny's here in LA, Pans. If you've ever been to Pans, it's gorgeous. In Santa Monica, Mel's, but they did all the massive coffee shops, and these renderings were just gorgeous. And the book is done is framed on all these renderings.
What I love about this,
very cool.
These architects were hired to design the buildings, but they on the side, not even as a line item, a charging line item, designed the brand. So, for example, Norms, the famous brand here in LA. that sign became their logo. They designed the sign to get the job to do the building.
So, Michael, when we rewind this podcast, there's a direct quote from you saying, "People don't look back." And now it seems that your passion is looking back.
No, it's tying things into history.
Not in advertising. I don't think people necessarily look back.
But is there something in that in advertising, people don't look back, but in your life, you think that you do? That's what you do.
I think there's a way of living a richer life when you understand what happened around you. On a micro level, and then maybe the footprint that you walk in the city in, or on a larger Southern California level. We relate to people a lot better when we understand what's been going on in the area. In Santa Monica, for example, when the freeway came through Santa Monica, a lot of people got moved around. In Venice, where I kind of occupy now, there was heavy redlining, and there was a lot of repression there. And guys that I grew up with here in Venice, their grandparents were from a very repressed place, and there's still effects on kids that I grew up with that are in their that are now in their 50s and their kids. And understanding that all this kind of longer, wider, broader perspective of history, I think helps people relate to each other, and that's part of the work that I do at the Venice Heritage Museum.
So
it's interesting. So you've got these two lives, which are very contrasting.
Two different careers. One is with advertising, and that really, I think, financially holds me up. But the other is books, exhibitions, and most recently the Venice Heritage Museum, which you opened up last March.
So the kid who found all those cool maps in the closet, which, by the way, makes me want to search like every closet in every person's house that I know. So cool. What would he think of like how you've been able to put everything together in these dual parts of your life?
I would say that he's trying his hard to live like, kind of a rich, dynamic life, and not really live in one lane. Really, to really try to flourish in many narratives as I can. Surviving the dream, I think, the way you guys frame the show, in many ways, I think that's the way I've survived the dream, is I haven't just lived in advertising. I've been lucky enough to, in my 20s and early 30s, I painted on the sides and then evolved that energy into doing books and exhibitions, and now the Venice Heritage Museum. And I think in living that life transparently, with transparency in front of the advertising coworkers I have, I think is kind of put a larger feather in my cap.
Now, you said to us before that some people in advertising, they live it, they love it, and you kind of surprise them when you say this isn't the be all and end all. I'm misquoting you.
I think I do. I think there's probably two types of people in advertising. There's like the ones that majored in advertising, and then there's the ones that kind of, I think, fell into it. Maybe they were creative writers or fine artists and things like that. And, I think it doesn't really matter how you got there or if you live it or don't live it. I mean, no one's doing it more than 8 hours a day, So, I mean, people might say that, but and in many ways, it enables me to not have all my cards in, and I think that's actually kind of like an asset, But I don't talk a lot. I don't talk to a lot of advertising people about that. Like if someone says, "Oh, I live and breathe advertising," I just kind of leave it alone. I mean, good for you, So, I don't think that's the truth. I think they have other truths, that they probably represent when they're not at work.
So what is the dream for you?
I would say in many ways the dream is to keep going in these channels and maybe find more channels as I grow older, The Venice Heritage Museum is a very interesting channel that brings content. All these people are donating content to the museum, their life stories. That's a beautiful story. And that even it fuels advertising. It helps me understand people's feelings and helps the more I can understand a broader swath of people's feelings. I'm talking about ages, cultures, and the more I can kind of go in there and speak to them from a visual narrative or a campaign narrative.
So what inspires you, like when you're doing that?
I think I'm usually inspired by other people's sacrifices to things. To be honest, there was a woman that came in. She was a post office woman in Venice her whole life. For example, and she kept everything. She kept newspaper clippings about everything that happened in Venice through the LA Times. And it was such a beautiful, by the time she donated to us, she had this kind of exclusively Venice only, and I was like, wow, what a love story she has to Venice, and what a life she lived loving Venice and understanding people's intimate passions that, hey, maybe during the day you're just producing, I can't even think. You're doing something that strictly only exists in work, and then like in looking at you have paintings in the background. There's other narratives and understanding how those are all triggers for people to listen to other people's narrative. Oh, hey, I know you. I see some abstract expressionist paintings. Okay, so how do we key into that? We want to talk about that. I'm inspired by other people's passions, and the closer I can get to that, the warmer I stay and the more impassioned I stay.
Like, do you have any kind of routine or anything you do to like get yourself into the creative flow, or do you just wait for inspiration to strike, or like what's your process?
I am truly not afraid of failing for many, many hours. And I think that being maybe having so much experience failing and knowing that failing is really a pathway towards getting to where you want, and not being afraid of sucking, whether it's in design or in advertising concepts. I just keep pushing and pushing, and I just keep taking failure and failure. And then suddenly a mistake happens, and it's a beautiful mistake. And then you angle off those mistakes. So if someone's listening and saying, what's the secret to success or to staying in front of something, I would really just say it is not being afraid to fail. Just keep going. I truly it's hard to say that, but in the first 3-5 years in advertising, I think everyone kind of sucks. It's like there's a lot of failure. There's a huge learning curve, and I definitely failed plenty of times, and still fail all the time. And I have to let people know, hey, wait a second here. I'm just a human here. I think this could be better. I want it to be better. Let me come back with something better, and understanding that that conversation is just as valuable. It's like, hey, not everyone's throwing up a bronze statue right away. There's a lot of failure.
I think that's a theme that we hear a lot, especially, you hear it from sportsmen. Baseball's a great metaphor. I remember Derek Jeter saying that it's a sport where if you succeed 3 out of 10 times, you're a huge success. And I kind of take that into life as well. I think that's great to hear that thing. And I certainly would, as an artist, I think that you are going to fail more than you succeed.
Yeah, it's definitely the same as what we do.
Yeah, and I think it also works with software, right? All the software that we're perpetually having to learn, you're going to be making things first that work well on a conceptual level, but then necessarily might not be able to be executed the way you have. You might have painted all the time with a new piece of software. You're always under the threat of painting yourself in the corner, right? Like showing a beautiful still that you're going to say you're going to animate out, and then either myself or an animator goes, "You fool! You painted us into a corner." You're like, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry." So there's a lot of failure in the process of creating a creative campaign, but there's a lot of failure in perpetually learning the software and staying sharp. And that's hard because you have to have a deep value of worth somewhere within yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember working with a director in a movie, and he was like, he goes, "I'm basically looking for mistakes because that's what's going to go into the movie." It's like, because those will be the truthful moments.
Yeah.
When, you're trying to get your lines right. You're trying to make sure you hit your marks. You're trying to make sure that you do it in the best possible way. But actually, he said, "I really want you to mess up."
Right. It's like the freedom to play and find the magic, right? Instead of like keeping such a tight cord around it of like, it's got to fit into these tiny coordinates and this little thing. And then if it doesn't, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said as like, sometimes the client wants something that's right over the table and very accessible to create and make, and get that out of the way. Get exactly what the client wants. In fact, put in twice as much time as you think, and to make here's what the client wants, and then keep trying ways to break it down and rebuild it, break it down, and rebuild it. And sometimes that's a great way of starting, is going, okay, what do we know we can do right away? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, our client wants this look or this type of campaign. All right, let's make that, and then let's put it up on the wall and really look at, maybe it's the feelings that the client wants, but they're only expressing the roadmap to there. And so maybe there's another roadmap to those feelings, or maybe they're wrong with the feelings, whatever it is. And there's other feelings that we could add to it. I always try to do the easiest first, and then work hard to those alts that are potentially more valuable.
Mm-hmm. How do you find working with, like, in advertising, working with multi-generations, Michael?
It's, every couple of years you just realize, wow, that person is from a different world that I know about. Like, literally, a 24-year-old, 26-year-old is from an entirely different world than me. Yeah. And every 5 years you kind of come to that realization, like, wow, I have to just hang out with that person to understand. First, they have to understand me, right? Mm-hmm. We have to be able to understand each other, because we would be we're teammates, whether they're within the advertising agency or on the other side, on the client side, we're essentially still teammates. So there's always this kind of back end labor of making sure everyone feels understood. Mm-hmm. I have to feel understood, and I want to make sure whoever I'm communicating with, I know where they're coming from. During COVID, I think it got tricky because a lot of those younger people weren't adjacent to more experienced people, and they lost, I think, a lot of valuable adjacent training, modeling training, almost where you're just seeing someone else do it, like literally being over your shoulder, seeing someone else do it, seeing someone else fail. A lot of that, I think, was lost a lot during COVID years.
Interesting.
And so there's that little gap, and now we're kind of filling that gap in.
Is that the danger with the virtual world that we live in now, that you could actually just present your finished product rather than how you got there? It's like, I remember in math, I was always told at school, hey, the answer might be 57, but you get more marks for all the...
Show your work.
Work. I think show your work is huge. I think show your work is a big deal. And if you get people to like you, mm-hmm. and you get them to understand the show your work process, then it's open narrative to kind of come up with a solution. And I think with younger creatives, there's a sense of pride, right, where you don't want things to be broken down and go, hey, where did you turn right or left here? Let's review that. When you do that retrospectively, it looks like a critique. Mm-hmm. When you're doing it as the process, within the process of the work, it feels like a team effort, So that's a tricky thing. You want to be there while it's happening so it doesn't feel like a critique.
So you're basically running an ad campaign for in-person work right now. Is that what you're saying, Michael?
I think I'm probably my own product. My first product is me. It's like, hey,
I'm feeling it. I'm with you. I'm like, no.
I think the in-person is invaluable also, where you're much better with it. Do you find that the mentoring part of it becomes more a part of your job the longer you do it? And did you have someone who did that for you when you started?
Well, I had those older drafting table. There was 2 men and 1 woman that had their drafting tables, and really when I was translating those drafting tables, from transparency paper to Photoshop, Illustrator, and Quark layouts, I think I got a great a kind of great tutelage. And not all of it necessarily was from them, but it was from that process of going, oh, I see why this headline's this and the second reads this. And I see how they always keep the first, second, and third read that's very clear and crisp and pristine. And I see, the new campaign, how it's slightly the same and slightly different. And just being the person that was just translating for a long time, it was a great education.
The 10,000 hours.
Yeah, I think to a degree. I mean, now it's tricky. That 10,000 hours, like you can go to the Canva, for example.
Right.
You could have an AI write a headline, and then a bunch of visuals come into the back end, and if, for an untrained eye, that might be just good enough.
Well, talking of the 10,000 hours, we're coming to the end of this podcast. So we're going to go to regular questions now that we ask everybody, Michael. There's no wrong answer. I want to know, what would you do if you won the lottery, the big one?
I probably would turn down the dial on advertising, turn up the dial on books, exhibitions, and paintings.
Fair enough.
Feed the inner artist.
I would probably still want to continue to do it because it keeps an edge. Quite frankly, it keeps me in front of software that I enjoy participating in the evolution with. I enjoy the visual narratives, and I think the art world could use a little bit of pep as well. Like, two paintings, for example, have, been around a little while.
You think?
I like you're going to reinvent things. My question is, what is your go-to snack? Like, is there one that when you're stuck on something that you're like, oh, this will help get me there? Like coffee and popcorn do me right every time when I have nothing.
Coffee and popcorn. I'm old school. I like toast with butter and jam.
So did the Beatles, so you're fine.
Yeah, I think maybe is it jam and butties? Is that what they call them? I don't know.
Yeah. I loved that when I was watching that Beatles documentary. They're always having cups of tea with their toasties. I thought,
I thought you're talking about the Peter Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was brilliant.
I've watched it so many times. It's like watching a Beethoven write a masterpiece. Right. It's like, how are they there? It's unbelievable to see. It's like going back and seeing like Seurat hit the points on a painting, like just coming up with this idea of pointillism. Wow! It's just
hey, John, how about this one?
Really see that?
And I find myself in times of trouble.
How about this iconic line that will last for all of time that just popped into my head?
Amazing,
unbelievable.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Dave.
All right, so I want to know, what is your favorite animal and why?
The animal, that's a tough one. I don't necessarily live in the animal kingdom. It's a tough one for me, but I do go to the ocean a lot. I collect moonstones with my daughter, and we're in the beautiful beach. And when a sea lion pops their head out and makes eye contact with me, I feel like that is just a magical moment where Mother Nature is looking at me and saying and acknowledging my existence. And I guess in some ways it's probably like, when a deer looks at you with those deer eyes, and you kind of feel that connection with nature. But I don't get deer very much. But when that sea lion pops their head out and looks at me in the eye, I feel like connected with a larger conversation.
Love that. Also, they're adorable. Final question, Michael. If we really knew you, what would we know about you?
I think if you really knew me, that I kind of represent old school ideals. I was a walk-on the University of Oregon basketball team. And there's something to be said about it. There's a unique breed of people. They're called walk-ons in sports, and they're only there because they work harder than everyone else, and they're slightly less talented. And I kind of take that same ideology everywhere else I go. I don't consider my talent to be the asset. I consider my, to use a jock phrase that I still kind of love, my stick-to-itiveness. I use my stick-to-itiveness to kind of push myself through and over a hump.
I love it. And I have learned a lot about advertising. I feel like I'm going to look at campaigns differently now and be like, how do I feel about this? Am I connected? Are they telling me a narrative that involves everyone? So thanks for helping me look at ads differently.
I think it's all feelings. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll stop pressing the skip button as much as I usually do. All right. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Quick shout out to Mike Nicholas for being our tech savior, and Carmen Sclafani, also known as Wiser Time. Thanks for our music. And thank you all for listening.